Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're setting off on really an incredible journey through the history of a nation often called the Giant of Africa.
That's right, Nigeria.
Exactly. A country truly unique in its multi-ethnic, multilingual character. Home to an estimated 250 ethnic groups, hundreds of dialects.
It's incredibly diverse, and the sources you've brought, they cover so much ground. History, economics.
Right. And our mission today is to really distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from all this. We want to help you understand Nigeria's complex path.
Towards national integration and hopefully sustainable democracy.
So, okay, let's unpack this. How did this incredibly diverse nation even come to be? What forces really shaped its destiny?
It's a huge question.
We'll start by exploring Nigeria's rich pre-colonial past, then move through the transformative and often challenging colonial era.
Yeah, that colonial period is key.
Then we'll dive into the struggle for independence and finally grapple with the triumphs and, well, the tribulations of post-independence Nigeria.
Right up to the present day and what might be next.
What's truly striking, you mentioned this earlier, is how the very act of its creation by the British, 1914, right?
Yes, 1914. The amalgamation of the northern and southern protectorates, it basically laid the groundwork for so many of the challenges that followed.
And this unity, it wasn't really unity, was it?
Not in a deep sense. It was pretty informal, mostly anchored on indirect rule, and it often relied on highlighting religious differences, using divide and rule tactics.
So instead of building a nation,
It actually prevented genuine connection between different ethnic groups. And then later on, you have the discovery of oil.
Oliberry, 1956.
Exactly, which just added another layer of complexity to the existing political imbalances. It's a tangled history.
Okay, so before the British really drew those lines on the map, what did the land we now call Nigeria actually look like?
Well, pre-colonial Nigeria wasn't some empty space, you know? It was a vibrant, dynamic tapestry of diverse indigenous histories.
Europeans had been there before the 19th century, right?
Yeah.
But it changed.
Oh, absolutely. Contact existed, but the scale just changed drastically when European powers got determined to scramble for territory across Africa.
And when we talk about ancient civilizations here, how far back are we really looking? What kind of history are we digging into?
Nigeria is genuinely one of the cradles of, well, earliest human habitation and civilization on the African continent. It's quite amazing.
Like how early?
Archaeological discoveries show sophisticated stone tools from as far back as 8,000 BC, around the Jos Plateau.
8,000 BC.
Wow. And even more astonishing, some sources report highly sophisticated petroglyphs, rock carvings, in the Borno State area dating back maybe 15,000 to 17,500 BC.
That's incredible. Just hard to fathom.
It really is. We also see the oldest Neolithic culture in Nigeria linked to pottery, calabash industries. In Suka region, maybe 2,500, 800 BC.
So a long, long history of making things, of culture.
Definitely. Then you get major historic civilizations emerging, like the Yoruba civilization of Ife, Oyo, Benin states, back to about 1200 AD. And the Jukunkwarafa, Hausa, Nupe peoples in the north, maybe around 1000 AD.
And then other influences came in.
Right. The entry and spread of Islam from the 10th century, then later, European explorers, colonists, missionaries, merchants, they all significantly impacted these existing societies.
But the original structures survived.
To a large extent, yes. Their dynamic structures largely survived that impact.
So given all that rich, deep history,
Mm-hmm.
what did the concept of Nigeria mean before the British really arrived and started consolidating?
That's crucial. The ethnic groups and cultures we now lump together as Nigeria were not seen as a single entity before, say, 1896.
So how are they grouped?
Early European contact, especially Portuguese and English, often brought people together under more localized names, like the oil rivers.
Based on trade. Palm oil.
Exactly. Common economic interests. And actually, historical accounts of wars show this, like the Lagos people fighting the British in 1851, or the Igbo against combined forces in 1854.
What do those show?
They show how readily these loosely federated groups would unite to defend shared interests against external threats. There was cooperation, but not necessarily a single Nigerian identity.
It's fascinating. How many groups are we talking about?
This region is home to more than 450 groups, often called nationalities, and over 50 of them are larger than most European states.
Wow. That's a lot of diversity.
Immense. and many lived in tribal autonomy. The Igbo people, for instance, for centuries were just a collection of autonomous local units, no central authority beyond the village group.
Very different from some other places.
Yes, a strong tendency for local self-governance, quite unlike some of the more centralized pre-colonial states in Nigeria. And linguistically, about a third of Africa's different peoples, over a third of its languages are found there.
Incredible. And the Yoruba region?
That developed one of the greatest and oldest well-recognized civilizations in West Africa, known for being politically and socially sophisticated.
Okay, so with this profoundly diverse and ancient past, what actually happened when the British arrived and started to really solidify their control in the 19th century?
Well, this period marks the formal imposition of British colonial rule. It really intensified during that infamous scramble for Africa.
Right.
British interests in the Niger River basin just grew rapidly. Lagos was annexed between 1851 and 1854, became a crown colony by 1865.
Was there resistance?
Oh, definitely. Fierce resistance over the next couple of decades. Notably from the King of Benin, his capital was destroyed in 1897. But the British gradually solidified control.
And then came the official declaration.
Yes. January 1900. The British Niger Company's sphere of influence was officially declared. It incorporated the Protectorate of Lagos and the oil rivers.
And Lord Lugard.
Appointed Governor General of both Northern and Southern Protectorates. He's the one who orchestrated the pivotal 1914 amalgamation.
Bringing these, as you said, vastly disparate regions under one new name, Nigeria.
That was the moment.
But that raises such a critical point. What was the actual lasting impact of forcing these different groups together like that?
Well, there's widespread consensus among scholars that the consequences were pretty dire. Many call it a recipe for crisis.
Why so negative?
Because before 1914, this territory was a patchwork of multiple sovereign ethnic national groups. Each had its own forms of government.
Yeah, and they were just merged.
Essentially, yeah. Forcefully abridged into one single entity for what the British called administrative convenience, not for the benefit of the people living there.
And how did they rule this new entity?
They adopted indirect rule, governing through traditional chiefs. But this policy actually deterred efforts to build an inclusive, unified socio-political structure. It worked against integration.
And the divide and rule part.
Yes, they implemented that systematically. A really impactful example was creating a vast educational and infrastructural gap between the North and South.
How so?
The largely Muslim North remained under Islamic control with indirect rule, less focus on Western education. The South had more mission schools, more exposure.
So by independence.
The North was literally a generation behind in many key areas, educationally, infrastructurally. This approach, while making control easier for the British, paradoxically created, as one source puts it, cultural heterogeneity as a colony of division rather than of unity.
Division, not unity.
Imagine forcing 43 disparate peoples and cultures into one political box. Unthinkable elsewhere, maybe, but it happened in Nigeria.
So that colonial foundation, it clearly planted the seeds for future tensions. It really laid the groundwork for so many later problems.
Absolutely, it set the stage.
And as the world moved into the mid-20th century, the winds of independence starting to blow across Africa, how did Nigeria, with this complex legacy, navigate its path to freedom?
Well, Nigeria's Independence Day, October 1st, 1960, it marked the British exit from this entity they'd politically maneuvered for nearly a century.
The 1914 amalgamation set the borders.
Right. And then, through a combination of things, constitutional reforms, relentless agitation by Nigerian nationalists, global pressures like World War II Nigeria gradually moved from total subservience towards self-governing rights.
It wasn't a smooth transition, though.
No, the period between 1947 and 1954 saw a really demanding transition from that indirect rule system to a parliamentary one. And even as the British claimed they were making Nigeria capable of standing on her own feet,
They were still dividing.
they fostered division along regional and ethnic lines, arguably making the path to true national integration even more difficult for the newly independent nation.
Who are some of the key figures, the leaders who really shaped this monumental struggle?
Oh, many individuals stand out across different eras. You had early reformers way back in the late 19th century.
Okay.
Then prominent nationalist politicians in the 1940s and 50s. Even student uprisings later in the late 60s, early 70s played a role.
And specific names.
Well, politically effective Nigerian Muslims and Christians rose to prominence. They successfully challenged British rule and its tactics. Sources mention figures like a staunchly anti-colonial Yoruba journalist,
Interesting.
the first Nigerian governor general, and also a modernizing son of an emir who confronted colonialism from a very personal perspective, lots of different angles.
And looking at the bigger picture, what was the effect of their activism?
Well, stepping back, while their activism successfully achieved independence, it also, maybe inadvertently, opened the door for ethnic nationality to become the primary basis of political identity.
Rather than a unified national identity.
Exactly. Early attempts to foster allegiance to a unified nation-state, whether through a central presidency or parliamentary coalitions, they often faltered. And that eventually preceded the era of military rule.
Right, so Nigeria achieved independence in 1960. The celebrations happen. What was the reality on the ground immediately after?
Well, the post-independence Nigerian state, frankly, it lacked the solid foundation needed for sustainable democracy, for good governance.
Why was that? What was missing?
The prevailing social order was sadly characterized by tribalism, by elitism, deep-seated bigotry. These things didn't just disappear at independence.
And the structure of the state.
Having transitioned from a more unitary system under the British, Nigeria became a federation of 36 regional states. But these were largely divided along those ethno-religious lines we talked about.
With all those groups.
Over 250 ethnic groups, some 300 linguistic dialects. The challenge was just immense. How do you efficiently administer and govern such a multifaceted nation?
That sounds like a recipe for instability, almost built in. How did that tension manifest itself in those early years?
Sadly, that's precisely what happened. Nigeria, which was once hailed as the pride of Africa, quickly faced numerous political intrigues. Things started to unravel.
When did it really turn?
The military coup of January 15, 1966, that was a profound turning point. It uprooted the politicians, introduced a completely new authoritarian form of governance.
And that led to?
It escalated very quickly into the devastating Biafra secessionist battle of 1967, a truly tragic civil war.
The human cost was enormous, wasn't it?
Devastating. Estimates say up to 3 million lives lost. Some sources even mention claims by heads of state of up to 12 million Igbo killed, though that number is debated. And excavations found tens of thousands in mass graves.
Horrific.
The war was even characterized by some as a starving match, though famously Biafrans never formally surrendered. The official post-war policy aimed for reconciliation. No victor, no vanquished.
But the instability didn't end there. The coup continued.
That's the broader pattern. Since 1960, Nigeria has endured an alarming 29 military coups. It's staggering. The military became this dominant, often destabilizing force.
You mentioned General Ironsi earlier.
Yes, General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi came to power shortly after independence, tried to unify the country into 12 states, but he was killed in a counter-coup by Northerners in July 1966.
Starting a cycle.
A tragic cycle of military regimes. General Yakubu Gowon, Murtala Muhammad, Olusegun Obasanjo, Muhammadu Buhari, Ibrahim Babangida. The list goes on.
And under military rule.
They often just suspended the Constitution, inherited their predecessors' decrees. It led to immense legal confusion. And some actions, like Babangida's restructuring, even inadvertently entrenched regionalism and ethnic clannishness further.
Given this incredibly tumultuous past, decades of military rule, how did Nigeria eventually manage to get back to civilian government?
A key moment was the passing of General Sani Abacha in June 1998. He was a hardline ruler.
His death opened the door.
It seems so. General Abdulsalami Abubakar, his chief of staff, took over and immediately prioritized a return to democratic civilian government.
What steps did he take?
He convened a national conference in July 1998. Political leaders, civil society, they actively participated. There was a strong push, largely driven by widespread economic pessimism, crippling poverty, and Nigeria's international isolation at the time.
So, a new constitution.
Yes. The new constitution adopted multi-party democracy, established the Independent National Electoral Commission, IMEC, and importantly, decentralized power.
How did the power shift?
It allocated a third of government revenues to states and local governments, trying to bring power closer to the people. All this paved the way for the return to democratic governance on May 29, 1999.
With Olusegun Obasanjo becoming president. A former military ruler himself, ironically.
Yes, a complex figure, but it marked the start of the Fourth Republic.
So democracy was restored in '99, but what about those deep-seated challenges, especially on the economic front? Did things improve quickly?
Well, the sources are pretty clear. Development in Nigeria, despite its immense wealth in human and material resources, has largely remained, as one source puts it, a mirage.
Mirage. That's strong.
It is. Millions still live in abject poverty. Nigeria ranks very low on the UN Human Development Index, 152 out of 187 when these sources were compiled.
And the oil wealth.
Paradoxically, its external reserve, while large on paper, $63.34 billion mentioned in one source, is sometimes described as indubitably useless, highlighting huge problems with mismanagement, corruption, wealth leaving the country.
So the oil boom didn't lift everyone.
It brought capital expenditure, growth in some sectors like banking, petrochemicals, yes. But it also fueled rapid rural-urban migration, overcrowding in cities, and a significant neglect of agriculture.
Creating dependency.
Exactly. A dangerous dependency that also worsened inflation and capital outflows. It wasn't sustainable development for the whole nation.
What are the root causes identified in the sources?
Many argue it's deeply rooted in a persistent lack of proper policy implementation. Policies are made, but maybe without really considering the impact on the target population.
And capacity issues.
Yes, a severe deficit in well-trained personnel to actually carry out plans effectively. This leads to just alarming statistics.
Like
97% of citizens living on less than $2 a day, according to one analysis. The highest youth unemployment rate in the world, over 65%. And just heartbreaking health and education failures. Half of Nigerian children under 5 die annually from preventable causes. It's stark.
It really puts the Giant of Africa title in a different light. We've explored the political and economic hurdles, which are clearly immense. But a nation is more than that, right? What about Nigeria's vibrant cultural heartbeat? How has that evolved, and how does it influence its place in the world?
Oh, absolutely. Nigeria boasts a distinct, incredibly rich and diverse cultural heritage. You see it everywhere, despite, some erosion from modernity, globalization, westernization.
What are some examples?
The visual arts are incredible. Pottery, sculpture, textiles, paintings. They're testaments to amazing artistic genius going way back.
But there's a challenge there, too.
Yes, it's worth noting that a lot of the research and even the artifacts themselves reside outside Nigeria, in Europe, America mainly. So there's a crucial need for Nigerian scholars to recover and document their own cultural legacy.
And language.
Yeah.
With hundreds of dialects.
That's another fascinating point. While writing in indigenous languages is rightly seen as a mark of literary patriotism, the global marketing and dominance of English sometimes comes at the expense of Nigeria's own languages.
Losing those traditions.
There's a risk. Losing those rich oral traditions, prose, folklore, criticism, which hold deep spiritual significance and are vital for ethnic identity, especially in a globalizing world.
That's a real tension. And what about Nigeria's famous music and dance traditions?
Truly a cradle of music and dance. Nigeria developed what we now might call mixed media performance art ages ago, combining African, Western, Asian genres. It's incredibly dynamic.
Even the British noticed.
Apparently, colonial institutions were reportedly surprised by the complexity. They found it a Herculean task to even decode it for documentation.
Wow. And it's often linked to activism.
Yes, this age-old tradition is often linked to socio-political commentary and activism, but now it faces challenges, too.
From what?
From emerging technology, changing tastes, perhaps a perceived moral decay in some eyes. It's leading to a decline in audiences for purely traditional forms.
You mentioned a specific example.
Yes, a tragic one mentioned in the sources about a dance scholar, Auntie Mabel Okodua. Her passion for traditional dance faced just insurmountable barriers as modern nightclubs and popular music took over audiences. It illustrates the pressure.
Such a loss. So considering these deep cultural roots alongside the massive human and natural resources we discussed, what is Nigeria's role on the global stage? Where does it fit?
Well, Nigeria's strategic position, its teeming population, remember, 70% under 35, which is huge potential, and its rich mineral resources, especially that black gold oil.
And it positions it prominently?
Very prominently in international relations. Its sheer size and potential historically earned it that giant of Africa reputation.
And it embraced that role early on.
Immediately after independence, yes. Leaders swiftly set up a Ministry of External Affairs. Nigeria quickly joined the UN, the Organization of African Unity, now the AU, other global bodies. It became very active in diplomacy.
Gaining respect.
This diplomatic activism earned Nigeria an international reputation for a time as the most respected and powerful country on the continent. There were even ambitious plans to become a world power within 100 years.
And its role in Africa specifically, the AU.
Its membership and role there are certainly justified by its size, its resources, still a major oil exporter, and its acknowledged military strengths. It's been a key peacekeeper and peacemaker in Africa.
Especially with conflicts within states.
Yes. The AU prioritizes conflict prevention and management, and Nigeria's contributions, particularly in post-Cold War intrastate conflicts, have been really significant in shaping Africa's collective response to peace and security challenges.
Okay, so let's bring it to today. Looking at contemporary Nigeria, how do all these historical layers, the colonial legacy, the post-independence turmoil, the cultural richness, the global role, how do they shape its current political and social landscape? Are those unresolved issues still dominant?
They absolutely are. The sources suggest contemporary Nigeria is still grappling with those unresolved issues, and in many cases they've transformed into more litigious ones, more conflict-prone.
What does that look like on the ground?
The post-independence period has just been marked by this perennial struggle between the ruling elite and the opposition, and it's fueled by those deep regional inequalities, the persistent ethnic and religious distrust, ongoing social justice issues.
Did the focus shift after the Civil War?
Yes. After Biafra, contestation shifted more towards things like secessionism, arguments over resource control, who gets the oil money.
And even after the return to democracy in '99?
Unfortunately, yes. Tendencies towards ethnic polarization, religious bigotry, elitism, they quickly reemerged. The democratic framework didn't automatically solve those deep-seated problems.
Leading to more conflict?
Sadly, yes. It has led to what one source calls a furnace of hate, fueled by ethnocentric bickering, really rancorous party politics, and worryingly diminishing security capabilities.
And the consequences we see today?
They're dire. Pervasive, gory kidnappings, insurgencies like Boko Haram bombings, and the overwhelming pressure of rapid population growth. All these are scuttling the nation's sustainable development goals. It's a very tough picture.
It really sounds like a daunting set of challenges, to say the least. But amid all this, are there any glimmers of hope? Particularly maybe from that huge young generation you mentioned.
Absolutely, there has to be hope. Nigeria has enormous political and economic potential. It's often described, perhaps sadly, as bloated potential that is not realized.
Bloated potential, meaning it's there, but
it hasn't been effectively harnessed. With Africa's highest population rate, the potential is huge for producing food, raw materials, and critically trained minds. Scientists, mathematicians, innovators.
So economists see potential in the numbers.
Yes, they often expect this high population growth could lead to robust economic growth, if managed correctly. That's the big if.
So the crucial question is, how can Nigeria leverage this potential for the future? Are there examples of positive action?
We do see examples, often small scale, of youthful idealism and innovation. One source mentions brothers Orji and Neo in the Northeast.
What do?
They sensed opportunity amidst the daily challenges, the wastelands, and took voluntary settlement security measures. They pooled resources, formed civilian militias to fight militant groups.
Like local defense forces.
Exactly. Reminiscent of efforts maybe seen in Iraq, it highlights a proactive approach to security challenges coming from the ground up, not just waiting for the state.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, the global goals.
Right. Nigeria's path forward is intrinsically linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. That set of 17 goals adopted by the UN in 2015.
Which cover everything.
Pretty much environmental, social, economic issues. Aiming for development that meets present needs without compromising future generations. For Nigeria, this means really confronting poverty, food security, energy security.
Through a local approach.
Ideally, yes. An integrated, locally centered approach, making sure development benefits the disadvantaged and helps reduce those tensions we talked about. Financing it all, though.
That remains a major hurdle.
A huge challenge, yes.
Wow. We've truly taken a deep dive into Nigeria's incredibly rich, incredibly complex, and yes, often challenging history. It's quite a story.
It really is.
From those ancient civilizations to the profound impact of colonialism, the struggles for independence, and this ongoing quest for stability and development.
It's a story of immense diversity, remarkable resilience, and as we just discussed, that vast, still largely untapped potential.
And something that really stands out, you mentioned this based on the sources, despite all the differences, right?
Yeah. The 250 ethnic groups, hundreds of dialects, the ethno-religious divisions, which are very real.
There's still shared values.
Nigerians still share some core values. respect for elders, strong family ties, consideration for neighbors, a commitment to fair play, and that universal desire for a better quality of life for themselves and their families.
And these can be built upon.
These shared values, along with existing social groups, unions, faith-based institutions, they offer truly viable ingredients for integration and unity moving forward. The building blocks are there.
So what does this all mean for you, our curious listener, taking all this in? Nigeria has historically been a nation just brimming with promise,
That potential to be the envy of all mankind, as some have put it.
but has also been plagued by mismanagement, by corruption, deep inequity, the Nigerian challenge, as it's called.
It contains profound lessons, not just for Nigeria's own future, its own corporate existence, but really for a healthy humanity everywhere. How do we manage diversity? How do we build equitable societies?
For me, what really resonates after going through all this is just the sheer complexity, matched by that incredible resilience. A nation that has endured so much, yet still holds so much promise.
Which begs, I think, an important question for you, the listener, to ponder. In a world that's grappling with its own divisions, its own challenges, what can Nigeria's extraordinary, sometimes painful journey teach us about finding unity and purpose amidst profound diversity?
That is a powerful thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Nigeria's extraordinary story.
Thank you.
We really hope it sparks your curiosity to learn even more.